نور على نور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And a warm welcome to everyone joining us for this online event hosted by Shajarat and Noor. My name is Ahmed Yamani, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our organization. Shajarat and Noor is a platform dedicated to reviving traditional cognitive frameworks inspired by the science of the heart, Ihsan. Through talks, workshops, and community programs, we aim to foster a deeper understanding of Islamic heritage and tradition, while offering grounded guidance for navigating contemporary challenges. Today's talk is titled Shifaa for Our Times, Returning to Nature, Returning to Our Nature. In an age marked by speed, fragmentation, and overstimulation, many of us experience forms of imbalance, spiritual, psychological, even ecological. This talk invites us to consider whether part of that imbalance stems from a deeper disconnection, a disconnection from our fiṭrah, the natural, divinely patterned state of the human being in the created world. Drawing on insights from Islamic psychology, Dr. Abdallah Rothman will explore the science of the soul, its inner dynamics, its vulnerabilities, and its pathways toward restoration. He'll help us reflect on how reconnecting with the rhythms and balance of the natural world isn't separate from healing itself, but deeply intertwined with it. We're very honored to be joined by Dr. Rothman. Dr. Abdallah Rothman is the founder of Dar al-Shifaa and co-founder and executive director of the International Association of Islamic Psychology. He's a licensed professional counselor and board-certified registered art therapist with academic training from Antioch University and Kingston University London. He's a student of the late Professor Malik Badri in Islamic psychology and has studied with traditional Islamic scholars across the Muslim world. His work is dedicated to establishing an indigenous Islamic framework of psychology grounded in the knowledge of the soul as articulated in our tradition. He currently serves as head of the Islamic psychology program at Cambridge Muslim College and holds visiting professorships at several international institutions. We're truly grateful to have him with us today. So here's how the session will run. Dr. Rothman will speak for approximately 45 minutes to an hour. After that, we'll open the floor for a 30-minute Q&A session. And you're welcome to submit your questions in the Zoom chat at any time, and we'll try to get to as many as possible, inshallah. And also, to stay connected with Dr. Rothman's work and with Shajarat an-Noor, you can find the relevant links in the chat shortly. So without further ado, Dr. Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for the invitation, Shajarat an-Noor, and it's really an honor to be with you all, and especially in this topic. It's a topic that's of great importance in our time and also very dear to me. My work, even though it's in the field of psychology, so much of it is about the human condition and everything that comes along with it, and this journey that we're on in being human. And the journey that we're in, our humanity, is in the earth and in this physical, manifest, material world. And so what we want to talk about today is to, well, first, let's set our intentions for whoever is here. Every time we start something, we connect with intentions, and the Prophet ﷺ instructs us to do this. First and foremost, being reflective and for the sake of growth, for the sake of connection, for the sake of Allah. So I invite everybody to connect with their own intentions for why they came here. And inshallah, you'll benefit from it, not just from what you intended, but what Allah intends to give you through it. My intentions for what I want to cover today is talk about kind of why we're disconnected, this crisis of disconnection, and how that particularly relates to being disconnected from fiṭrah, or disconnected from nature. And we'll talk about the nature of being, so our beings and our own nature. We'll talk about how the role of our bodies and our physical manifest beings in this earth is tied to our experience in this earth, and how connecting with nature allows us to connect with ourselves and have more knowledge of self. And so that nature and our interaction with nature and natural cycles being a source of knowing through experiential knowledge. And then want to always end with things that are practical. What does this mean for us today in these times? And what does it mean for what we need to focus on for this process of healing and returning? So, like I said, we're in a crisis of disconnection. And this disconnection causes dis-ease. We have this word disease, and we think of it as physical disease when there's something that's out of line, or something that is has an illness. But if you break the word, it does come from dis-ease, so not being at ease. And that not being at ease isn't necessarily the removal of difficulty or the removal of symptoms of pain or constriction or discomfort, but actually the lack of having rida, or contentment with it, and the lack of being aligned with the natural order. Because sometimes, as part of the natural order, there are things that need to die. There are things that need to be purified. But the dis-ease is when we're disconnected. And this has all kinds of ramifications. It causes fitna among people. It causes us to become out of sync with ourselves and with the natural order of the world. And this has always been the case to some degree, right? This is the nature of dunya, is that we're in separation, and that there's always going to be this possibility of disease. It's part of the package of being human in the dunya. But I would say that we live in a time where this is an increasing crisis of disconnection. And some of the factors that contribute to this have a lot to do with the society on a global scale. We used to be able to say sort of like Western culture, Western secular society, but now that's really taking root all over the world as things become globalized, and there's this culture of modernity that takes over. And materialism is this general orientation to the world and just seeing things only at their face value in their physical form, without there being an understanding that things have multiple dimensions and that there's a transcendent reality. And so we try to make sense of everything only on this material plane. And that kind of gives rise to individualism, self-direction, that we're just on our own here, and that we're trying to solve problems through our own sort of self-direction. And we're looking really at, when we don't have this paradigm of understanding tawheed, or unicity, and that there is a transcendent reality, then we become just trying to self-direct rather than be in a state of recognizing the natural order beyond what we can see. And globalization has such an impact on this because we're no longer oriented towards local systems of order, right? There's things that happen in local, like if you look at ecology, you look at a natural landscape, and all the things are feeding into it that help sustain it. And traditional societies were always organized around local economies and local systems. And that has a natural order to it. And there's a health in that. So when we globalize and we spread out, we become disintegrated and disaggregated. And that all kind of makes us be disconnected from nature, because all those things, used to be that the more that we were local, the more that we were in community, the more that we were connected with this transcendent, the more there was a connection with nature. And so the modernity has really taken us away from this fiṭrī way of living or natural way of living. And the opposite of that is, the opposite of disease or dis-ease is afia, well-being. But afia from the Arabic, but also in the Islamic tradition, isn't just physical health, it's not just comfort, but it includes this multidimensional aspect of our being. So, and it recognizes that there's something off when we are out of balance with the natural order of things. And again, like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's comfortable, but that everything is in submission to how it is. And there's a contentment with that, even like I said, if there's difficulty. And so that is what we're talking about when we talk about health, or the original English word was wholth, coming from wholeness. And so this wholeness is something that is necessary for us to heal, and to not just heal, like I said, to remove symptoms, but to heal in the larger trajectory of the human purpose in life. And so healing, in my work within Dar al-Shifaa, which obviously means house of healing, and it's looking back to, like, in the Islamic tradition, there were these Dar al-Shifaa, these houses of healing that dealt with the psychological, the spiritual, the social, all of these things, the physical, integrated, because this is how we see the human being. And so our work within Dar al-Shifaa, we're focused on really the nurturing of the soul and the heart, because this is what is longest lasting. But we have to involve the physical world and the physical engagement with the body, the being, and the earth, because that's how we come into knowing. That's how we come into wholeness. So I want to focus on these first two principles, holistic conception of being and harmony with nature. And both of these principles are anchored in the concept of fiṭrah. So in this ayah, we see that in order to set out on the deen, or the path, this deen hanifa, this path, upright path, we must do so by aligning with the natural order that Allah has put within all people and within His creation, fiṭrah. And it's this natural patterned, encoded thing in the nature of all things, including the human being. And so this frames the notion that the right path is closest to how Allah created it, rather than man-made systems or ideologies. And, of course, everything that exists is a manifestation of Allah's will. But we have our part to play in our choices, both individually and collectively. And that determines our relative state. And so when it says here, there's so much here in this ayah of that in order for us to be on this path, we have to be in accordance with this natural encoded pattern. This is kind of the guidance, and it's instilled within us. It's something natural to us. It's not something we have to get out there. It's something we have to uncover from within. And let there be no change in the creation of Allah, meaning that the more that we're closer to the way that Allah has created things, the closer we are to what's pure, what's good, what's fitrah. And so fitrah is this primordial, innate, natural disposition. And it's the natural disposition of anything, of all things created by Allah, both in nature and our nature. And when we don't cover it over or go astray from it, we can be connected to our origin and our destination and be on this this paths. And so both of these principles that we're going to talk about are anchored in this notion of fiṭrah, both looking at our fiṭrah and the fiṭrah of the natural world. So let's start looking at the nature of the human being and this principle of holistic conception of being. So generally speaking, in modernity, we have come to a point where we are oriented towards dualism or Cartesian dualism. René Descartes' statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, is more than just a notion that we are our thoughts, but it is this disconnection between material and our sort of metaphysical identity, that it kind of rejects the metaphysical and looks at, we would see from an Islamic point of view, everything has primary causation from the will of Allah, and everything else is secondary causation. But what this materialism does in dualism, it's looking at secondary causation and splitting things. So it's like a doctrine of disconnection, that the self is independent, it's on its own, it's removed from it, the integration with the body. Like we see these pictures when we talk about our mental health or our individual identity. It's this organ in the brain, and it's this cut off, severed head that's disconnected from a body. And so we see oftentimes this modernity positions us to be disconnected from, disconnection between body and soul. And so this has kind of fueled this ideology of secularism and the removal of the sacred and the transcendent. But from the Islamic tradition, we have this very deep science of the soul that, yes, we understand cognition and intellect and the brain's impact in that of our consciousness and our notion of self, but there's this much more dynamic system. This is a model that's come out of my research, and I won't go into the details of it, but what I want to demonstrate here is that it's holistic, and it's a recognition of both Allah first, that Allah is present in His creation and guiding His creation, not this removal or disconnection. And so the doctrine or the principle of Tawheed, of unicity, is that everything is integral and integrated. And so it's this complex and dynamic notion of the self that is more than just material. We have the pre-eternal. We even have a prenatal identity. We existed before this life, and we will have a post-mortem identity. We will continue after this life. And that this does not follow this dualism where we're separating body and spirit. We don't divide the body versus the soul because of this principle of Tawheed, of unicity. So it's never this or that. There are multiple dimensions of existence. So it's more like when we think of, are we trying to understand this or that? The mind, when we tend to understand things, we think linear. But the reality, Allah's reality, is multiple dimensions of existence. And so the dimensions of the self, the nafs, the separate sense of ourselves is separate, the aql, the intellect or the perceiving, the qalb, the heart, and the ruh, the spirit, are actually infused, you could say, within the jism or the jasad, the body, the physical manifestation. We can even think of it as that the body is a dense manifestation of the soul, that it's not just this material body that contains the soul, but that the soul, the body, is what the soul looks like in the material realm. And so we're dealing with paradox. We see one thing, but there's multiple dimensions to it, rather than just splitting everything from disaggregation. And so our body is really important in our path on this life. We can't neglect it. We have to fully embody it. But it's not the totality of or centrality of who we are. We existed before the body and we'll exist after the body. And our true nature is the ruh, or as spiritual beings. So I like this quote from this French philosopher: we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Basically, it's saying that we do have this manifest physical experience as human beings, but our primary identity is not our nafs. It's not our separateness. Our sense of ourself is separate. It's our ruh, that we have this soul, this that is connected to Allah, that is existed before, and in its existence before saw everything clearly, was in witness of the reality. And we have that within us, even though we can be occluded from that or forgetful of that. And so we live in between the spiritual, or at the same time, spiritual dimension and physical dimension. And our being is in both those worlds at the same time, because we have a manifest separate self that's according to the dimension of dunya, and we have a ruh, a unseen metaphysical part of ourself that is connected to the transcendent spiritual realm, and that exists in our body, right? So it's not nafs or ruh, it's that these are different dimensions within the body. And so the body is the location or the meeting point of these multiple dimensions. And so in order to fully embody and inhabit our being in this world, we have to interact within the world to sustain this multi-dimensional connection. So it's like we exist between these two axes of the vertical or the spiritual that connects us to this transcendent, and this horizontal physical realm that we live in. And in the center is where we need to exist, to be awake to all of the multiple dimensions, to not just be reductionist into thinking I'm a physical body and I think therefore I am, and I'm just this material entity, but awake to all of it. And how we do that, if you look at even in this visual, the axis in these two, or the middle of these two axes is in the chest. And so the qalb is the mediator between our ruh and our nafs, or our potential of our fiṭrah, of the ruh, of being in witness of Allah and connected to this transcendent, and our physical, bound to this earth experience that we can get occluded, we can get stuck on and covered up, but the heart has the ability to perceive things as they are. The heart has both a physical manifestation and a spiritual. You know, there's a metaphysical heart and a physical heart in the same location. And so and this exists in the chest, you know, in our physical body. So there's these different dimensions of our spiritual heart, that the sadr is the external facing that we experience here, and then there's different layers. And so psychological blocks, spiritual blocks, physical blocks are all intertwined. And so they have to be dealt with together for healing, which is why in our tradition, the physicians were psychologists, they were philosophers, they were theologians. They knew and were treating the soul at the same time that they were treating the body. And the heart being the main focus of healing. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, there's a piece of flesh in the body. When it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. When it is sound, the whole body is sound, and that is the heart, the qalb. And this is the metaphysical heart. And so we see this ayah, have they not traveled throughout the land so their hearts may reason, yaqiluna. You know, we have this word aql that we think of intellect, but the word aql is not used in the Quran as such. It's used in this form, yaqiluna, like an intellecting or a perceiving, and it's a faculty, often referenced as a faculty of the heart. And so then Allah tells us, indeed, it's not the eyes that are blind, but it is the hearts in the chest that go blind. So he gives a physical location to the metaphysical heart. And what I love about this is if we look again at the beginning of the ayah, to kind of bring this into connection with nature, he talks about, have they not traveled throughout the land so that their hearts may reason? And so how is all of this activated? When we engage with nature, we travel throughout the land, we're able to reflect insight, not just through knowing in our mind, but from the heart being able to see things as they are. And that this knowledge can be illuminated from reflection in nature. So there's a balance between how we learn information and how we have to be open to reflection to receive illumination and for transformation. And so this is all about reflecting and illuminating and remembering, right? It's like returning. We think of tawbah as like making amends for sin, but it's really about turning. And we're constantly, the qalb is a turner, taqallub, it turns. And so we're turning to Allah, and in the turning, we're sort of constantly returning to our nature. And we're meant to forget. Looks like there's anyway, that's supposed to say insan, and then with the Arabic, it looks like I lost the Arabic fonts. But insan has the same root as the word for to forget. And so our main ailment, or the main source of our disconnection, is our tendency to forget our nature, to forget our origin and our destination. And so it's fine, it's adi, we're made to forget so that we can remember. And this is the journey of being human, it's the journey of Islam, and it's very much the journey of healing. And our connection to nature is a key part of how we return. So in looking at the second principle of well-being or healing is harmony with nature. And so I have this saying, we find our nature in nature. In order to have knowledge of self, there's a saying, he who knows himself knows his Lord. And so this process of uncovering or gaining knowledge of self is not just about having knowledge in terms of information. This is important too, right? We have in the tradition always ta'lim and tarbiyah. We have intellectual knowledge from books and learning, reading Quran, reading from the scholars, being taught, and we have tarbiyah, that is through experience and opening. And so there is a knowing that is awakened or illuminated within us, even about our own nature, self-knowledge, when we interact in nature, the natural world. It reflects our nature in the innate fiṭri part of ourselves. And that fiṭrah is, the ruh is the part of us that connects with the state of being in witnessing and in submission and in alignment. And so this is encoded within us. There's never a moment when we're without our ruh. It just can become covered over. And we can uncover because we have this encoded within us. And so this knowledge or wisdom can be revealed. And Allah is many times in the Quran pointing us to nature, the signs of the horizon, as a dalil or a thing pointing to ourselves, our nature. And that in order to engage, again, have they not traveled in the land so that their hearts can yaqiluna, can reason? And so we look to nature, we engage with nature, and we find out about ourselves. Again, another point in the Quran, there are signs on the earth for those with certainty and in yourselves, right? There's the signs on the earth reflect what is within us. So it's both literal and figurative because it's multidimensional. We exist in this multidimensional existence, and Allah's creation is reflective of these different dimensions. So in order for us to engage with, interact, perceive, and receive the transcendent metaphysical knowing of this is what we're trying to come in when we turn our heart in remembrance, is to be aligned with remembering that we come from somewhere else. We come from Allah, we return to Allah. Because if we just stay with our body and our thoughts and our physical trajectory, we'll get caught up. We'll forget. We'll run after success in this life. We'll run after comfort. We'll run after accumulation of wealth or material things and our own self-direction. And so we need reminders to access what our heart knows, what our heart has the capacity to know, but what our ruh is constantly connected with. And so this literal and figurative reflection in our being and in nature is how we align ourselves on this axis. So I like, this is kind of a artistic version, a rendition of Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, which is about this microcosm of the macrocosm. But it's also something that the scholars write about. Many scholars have written about this concept of the human being a microcosm, the small world of the larger universe of this. And so it's this patterned reflection of, so Leonardo da Vinci draws it out and like connects all these things to the cosmos. And so what we can find in that reflection is guidance and knowing that's not just about information. And it's not just about let me see these things, know them, understand them, and that knowing will guide me, but that when we open to perceiving and experiencing and being in connection with the patterns that are in the universe, the natural encoded patterns that are within us become unlocked and in alignment. And so rather than trying to constantly only be stuck in guiding ourselves through our own thought and our own discipline and behavior, this kind of just cognitive behavioral approach to everything, we have to actually engage the qalb and the ruh through opening to the body being attuned to and in submission with these natural order, to then be attuned and in submission to Allah. And through that, things get unlocked in us. Our heart opens and the illumination happens. And so on a more detailed level, this is what some of the scholars have made these literal connections, even, the body being, the frame of the body being like the earth, the bones like the mountains, and then even the minerals in the rocks like the marrow. So they're painting this picture of these different connections, and we can actually, it seems really abstract and poetic, but you can imagine if you travel the land like Allah constantly tells us and sees these signs on the horizon, what happens is when you connect with, let's say, the mountain. If you've ever experienced being in by a mountain, there's this visceral experience that happens that you feel not only, okay, that feels like my bones, sure, like that's a connection, but even there is in our physical experience of the natural world, it's a reflection of a metaphysical quality of Allah. So like the mountain is very firm. Allah is al-mateen, right? The firm. Or Allah is majestic. And when we experience the mountain, it's not just a cognitive, oh, that's interesting, I understand that, but it's I feel this power or this thing that's bigger than me, and that quality is something that unlocks experientially. And so it's this tarbiyah that happens through experiencing and engaging and being around the natural world, because embedded within the natural world are qualities and nuanced knowledge of Allah. So it's like nature is a book that we read. And we are a part of the earth, right? So this idea of coming back to knowing the self, and again, it seems like an abstract notion to think that the human being is created from earth, from mud. But we know we come from the earth, we return to the earth. That's a particular part of our journey, because we go somewhere else. We came from somewhere else, we go somewhere else. But there's something about the manifestation of our life here that we can experience when we get closer to fiṭrah. So the earth being the origin of our physical, origin and destination of our material existence. And this is also reflected in our temperaments. So the scholars have made these connections, and a lot of this comes from Greek medicine, but they've adopted it, and infused it with the tradition, in the Hikmah tradition, with prophetic medicine. And so we're looking at these elements of the earth and how they relate to our mizaj, our temperaments, the different qualities that we have that are possibilities of ourselves, that it's not about this is how you are, but we understand that we have reflections in the patterns in the world that come out in our character, and that are impacted by seasons as well. And then the scholars also have overlaid with these dimensions, with these elements, with the dimensions of the soul, or the lataif. So the ruh, aql, qalb, nafs also being, so we have individual temperaments, but then we also have sort of universal human connections to these things. And so there's this deep learning that can happen in our awareness and connection to natural cycles and rhythms that can point us back to our nature through nature. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of these practical steps or practical things of how to enact this reconnection in our healing. So we have to always be on this path of individual healing, but there's also a collective healing for the ummah, but also humanity. And it's this path of return, because none of us are staying here, or none of us get out of here alive, right? So we're moving through this life. And the goal is to return, not to return to where we originally came in the same state, but that we're returning to the part of ourselves that knows, that is in witness and submission. And we have the possibility of becoming more whole, becoming closer to elevating in station, to becoming closer to the Prophet, or through the path of the Prophet, to come closer to Allah. And so, because we're so influenced by this modern lifestyle and modernity, that we tend to get really disconnected from ourselves, because we're disconnected from nature. And so part of the path that we need to take on for our time is to balance, and almost in some ways fight against, the push that modernity takes us away from nature and away from these innate fitri ways of being, and try to implement some of them. We have to do it realistically and practically. We live in the world that we live in, and that's part of what Allah has manifested. But there are certain principles, first principles, that don't change. And being connected to nature is not something that's optional. It's all throughout the Quran, it's all throughout the Sunnah. And so the closer that we are to fitrah, the closer you are to health or wholeness, right? And so this means the closer we are to the the ruh, the part of ourselves that is in witness, by doing the work of uncovering our heart and doing tahliya, taking out whatever's getting in the way of our witnessing, and doing tahliya of remembrance of Allah, turning. And so it's in the nature of our being, returning to fitrah, but also material things. So the closer we are to, even using natural materials for things. It's not just that, if we look at the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ used natural things. You could say like, well, that's because there weren't all these other innovations. Yes. And there is something that when you use things that are made from like wood, like the sibha, when we use for remembering Allah, we're often it's wood or stones, and our skin, which is made of earth, is touching something else that's from the earth, and there's this connection in our remembrance. Clothing, like if we wear clothing that's made of natural fibers, there's hikmah in this. There's hikmah in being connected. And then a really important one that I want to focus a little bit about is on food. So whatever we eat that is more natural is more healthy, because we take it into our body and we get closer to the fitrah, which can help us align with fitrah. It's part of like intentionality, right? So it's not just halal, but tayyib. And so Allah tells us to consider this. So He tells us to look at our food, and then He talks after this. He talks about how all of the food that grows from the earth as signs and things that we should consider and pay attention to, not neglect. And in modernity nowadays, oftentimes many of our foods that we eat are processed and packaged and not necessarily directly from the earth. And then sometimes when we eat things that are directly from the earth, they're also doctored with chemicals, and they're still removed from their natural state. And so if we look at food as a connection to nature, this doesn't mean that, if you eat only healthy and organic, that you're going to somehow suddenly be more spiritual or suddenly not have health issues. But the point is that it's all about aligning our intention and having it increases our taqwa when we do it for the sake of returning and connecting. And there is a physical reality. So it's not just about intention, but there is a physical quality and hikmah within the substances that can impact your physical body, which can then impact your spiritual body. And so, if we can try to eat more whole foods, the less processed, the closer it is to fitrah, the closer it's going to lead towards us being aligned with fitrah. Eating slowly and consciously, not in a hurry and fast and rushed, fast food, I have a teacher that said, well, if you're going to eat fast food, eat it slowly. So it's just practical. Like sometimes we have to, but it's about bringing consciousness, being aware of what we eat. Where did it come from? Sometimes we can make this like a meditation where we're thinking while we're eating, chewing more, and thinking like, what about the hands that had to pass through all the people that were laboring in the fields? How were they treated? What line of connection does that lead us to or connect us with? And then having gratitude. And then the more that we eat seasonally, again, this goes back to the problem of globalization taking us away from local economies, which then put us in line with local systems and ecological connections that, when we're eating foods that are grown or that are produced at the time that we're in. So like we're eating bananas all year round and we live in a place where bananas don't grow. There's something out of sync with our bodies and the physical geography where we are. So, we can't necessarily be purists about this, but we have to put it into balance because modernity is kind of pushing us in this way so much. Where if we look at older generations, that was less so, and it was more of a just normal, natural thing to kind of live in this way. Just to think about, there is a reality to food as pleasure, and this could be nafs oriented. That's not a bad thing. It's good. Food as fuel, like our body needs fuel, but we can also look at it on the ruh level of the food, the physical qualities that are in that can be like medicine for us, not only nurturing our body, but nurturing our soul. And so just bringing more consciousness to this. And when we have this consciousness, it disciplines the nafs. But it's not this harsh discipline. It's a loving discipline that's rooted in mercy. It nourishes the ruh, and we connect with the sort of hikmah. Each plant has a particular medicine, or a particular quality, or a particular hikmah, a particular wisdom that can actually fundamentally impact us if we're paying attention on a subtle level. And so when we eat with awareness and we kind of attune to this subtle level, food can become a bridge between our inner nature and our outer nature, right? Because we're literally, our inner nature is like our spiritual being, but on our internal landscape, we're meant to kind of do this work inside of us of changing what is within ourselves. It's the only thing that's within our inner locus of control. Everything else is outside of us, is in Allah's hands. But we have this responsibility to orient our inner world and engage with the outer world. And so when we're eating, we're literally taking something from the physical, from nature, and putting it into our internal. And then our body, on a physiological level, takes that and uses it to nourish us. And that's a physical thing that has an intimate spiritual reality to it as well. And so we need to be more attuned to nature, not just as like, some people say, well, I'm not an outdoor person. That's a product of modernity, and it's a product sometimes of post-colonialism. It's not something that we should get too stuck on of like, well, I don't like the outdoors, or I'm not an outdoors person. That's part of what is hurting us. It's part of what disconnects us individually and on a societal level. And so it's not to say everybody move out of the city and move and become a farmer, but that we need to integrate and make sure that we're staying connected to nature, because that's what Allah is telling us to do all throughout the Quran. And if we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, not just because he lived in a time before this modernity, but there's a reason why he rode horses, climbed mountains, grew his own food, built with his hands, walked long distances, spent most of his time outdoors, went to bed with the rise and setting of the sun. All these things of the Sunnah, rather than just paying attention to the length of our beards and our length of our pants, looking at the lifestyle being in sync. And that we need this in order to be, to have afiyah, to be connected and have well-being. And so when we're in nature, if we go outdoors on multiple levels, we can connect. Because even just witnessing the wind blowing through the trees and the waves crashing on the ocean, we can experience how Allah's creation is in constant submission. The birds are in constant remembrance of Allah. The trees are in constant submission to Allah and submitted to their dependence on Allah. So when we allow ourselves to connect and experience nature and actually contemplate on it in a deep contemplative state, not just here, but in a state, our soul can come back into a place of being in submission and in remembrance like Allah's creation is. So our nature is to be remembering Allah and be in witness of Allah. But we also the nature of our nafs is we're insan, is to forget. And so we need the trees and the birds and the waves and the wind to help us remember that we are in submission to Allah. And so we can use these signs on the horizon to point to our inner microcosm within ourselves, the part of ourselves that we need to change. And so one of the ways that we can do this is tafakkur, is contemplation, particularly contemplating on nature. In this ayah, Allah says, يَتَذَكَّرُونَ, those who remember, and يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, those who do tafakkur, or contemplate, on the creation of the heavens and the earth, right? Saying, have you not created this without purpose? Subhanallah, right? So you're supposed to look onto nature and it's supposed to impact you first up here, like fiqr, right? The root of tafakkur is fiqr, but Al-Ghazali tells us that we're meant to start with this external engagement with nature, and then it's supposed to lead into inner illumination and transformation. And so he, in his book, Kitab al-Tafakkur, or Bab al-Tafakkur, in the Ihya al-Ulumuddin, he kind of lays out these 5 stages of tafakkur, that it starts with, like in this ayah, Allah first says, remember, right? يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. So first we remember, we initiate a kind of like divine awareness. Oh yeah, Allah, subhanallah. And then we contemplate, engaging in a deeper focused reflection of the natural world. But then that's supposed to lead to an understanding that we're gaining insight from this reflection. We're not just saying, wow, aren't those mountains beautiful? But subhanallah, the mountain, it feels so firm and it feels so much bigger than me. And wow, I'm a part of this thing and Allah is holding us in this. But then that's supposed to lead the heart to be open to receiving illumination. So it's no longer just about the mind saying, subhanallah, isn't that amazing? And let me think about that. But the heart actually allowing this light to come. And this is like a deeper perception, the yaqiluna of the heart, the perception of the heart. And then through that process, we can change our state, which is the purpose. Allah says Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is within their self. And so that can change our physical and spiritual state. And so we need to not just go out for a walk in nature, but while we're in nature, contemplating, recognizing, aligning our breath with the wind and the waves of the ocean, and then leading that into a place where we are becoming in this state of sakina and peace. And we, in order to do that, we have to take a break from the busyness of the modern world that's always running and chasing, and it's always about outcomes and productivity and self-direction, and that causes disease. And so nature is like the biggest missing link in our day and age, particularly as Muslims. For what Islam points us to is that we need to be connecting with nature, even that we go and we pray with our head on the ground. The Prophet ﷺ said that all of Allah's creation is a place of prostration. And he used to leave earth on his forehead, to make that connection with nature. So I want to just end with like some kind of summary of some practical things that we, I think, need to do in our time. Is spending time in nature, actually literally scheduling that in. And even if you live in a place that's an urban environment, go to a park. Look on green trees. This was the sunnah of the Prophet. This is why his favorite color is green. And then syncing with natural cycles. So yearly, we have Ramadan, monthly, even recognizing, for men, recognizing and being in sync with the fact that women, their cycles is monthly. We forget because men follow this like solar thing every day. Well, women are on this lunar calendar, and Islam follows the lunar calendar. And so we need to be aware of all these different cycles and be in sync with them. And eating, not just halal, but tayyib. So if we can, really trying to find out where is the food coming from, making sure that, it's not just that it was zabiha, but that how are the animals treated? Where is the line? Where is it coming from? The closer we are to what's natural, the closer we are to what's healthy. And then being physically active outdoors is so, so important. It wasn't just a product of the old way of living, that why the Prophet and the Sahaba were physical. They were doing archery, they were doing horse riding, they were swimming, they were wrestling. We shouldn't think of these as like lahu, of like meaningless pastimes. The Prophet ﷺ specifically told us to do these, and we should understand them as sunnah disciplines, not just sunnah sports. That we need to, they align our body with our intention, with nature, and it puts our whole nature of being in order. You know, when you ride a horse, you are connected to breath, you're connected to your body, you're outside, you're connected to another being, it changes you, it fundamentally changes you, and we would have less difficulty managing with anxiety, depression, and trauma if we had all these things in our lives that were integrating trauma physically into the body. There isn't more trauma than there was in pre-modern times. It's just that there was more ways to integrate that collectively and in our lifestyle. And so connecting with what sustains you is connecting to remembrance. So what I mean by that is primary causation of everything, Allah is who sustains you. But He does that through asbab. And those asbab, the vehicles with which you're sustained, food, breath, the land which you live, the things that cover you, these are provided by Allah through His creation. And so when we reflect on these things, we can return and remember. So I want to end here, and I look forward to opening up to questions. But I also want to say that we at Dar Shifaa, we do these retreats specifically to get people out of their urban environments and into the natural world and experiencing eating healthy, being in nature, practicing tafakkur, contemplation in nature, being in suhbah. And it's, I think, one of the things that we absolutely need to do. Like online is great because we connect and we stay connected, but there's a missing link of being outdoors and being with one another outdoors and being physically active while we're learning about ourselves. So I just want to play this very short video. It's 2 minutes, just to give you a little taste of what that means and why it's so important for these things to be that we spend time in nature.
Nothing here feels forced. It's just flow. There's a lot of flow here. The knowledge that's being taught here with regard to just who we are in connection to our nature is deeply, deeply profound. Being at this retreat, you actually get to experience the Shifaa of the Quran. You get to be in nature, witnessing the healing of the Quran and the healing that Islam has to offer.
Dar al-Shifaa retreats are really for everybody to come and experience what it's like to be in community, what it's like to be in nature, and what it's like to connect with your heart. There's something here for everyone. There's meditation, there's prayer, there's sunlight, there's beach, there's forest, there's farm, there's wind. I mean, food is nourishing, prepared by people who appreciate the land, appreciate nature, appreciate God. It's something you can't really read in a book. It's something beyond words when you're sitting in it and experiencing it. And it's something that I just truly wish for everyone. We design all of these beautiful ways for people to connect. We bring content that's really powerful, but what is always the most prominent part of the people's experience is the dynamic of suhbah, of companionship. Something profound happens that is beyond something that we can even design for. There are some experiences you just don't have words for. And I think that's the point of being in a place where you don't have to keep talking, but you get to just be, and you get to just experience.
it's a very wholesome, holistic experience. And you just have to be here to experience it.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to interacting, and so we can open up for questions, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Abdallah, for that deeply reflective and insightful talk. You've really given us much to consider, the relationship between fiṭrah, inner balance, and the rhythms of the natural world, and a reminder that healing isn't merely a psychological technique, but a holistic restoration of alignment that really resonates. So now we'll open up the floor for the Q&A. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat, or raise your hand if you prefer to ask directly and unmute your microphone. Let me begin with a question to open the discussion. You mentioned a couple of, I guess, practical tools to instill the remembrance of Allah, like when eating food, to connect that with the intention and the gratitude of everyone involved, and then the practice of contemplation in nature. What other sort of practical things can we apply the Al-Ghazali framework of tafakkur, if you can, like general moments or activities that we find ourselves in?
I think it's, I mean, the ultimate goal is to orient our being to being in a state of remembrance as much as possible. So breath, for me, I feel like breathing is something that is so important that I feel like we need to learn how to do, because we've been so disconnected from this, like, all of what I was saying of like being connected to natural cycles naturally connects us to breath. And when we have a connection to breath, what it does is we're able to kind of like pause, take things in, move slowly, and reset in each moment. So the goal would be that, we pray 5 times a day, let's say. That's like the bare minimum that we need. The reason why it's like obligatory is because that's the bare minimum that we need to have periods of time throughout the day to reset. But in between, even like within moments after you leave the muslaya, you can be back in ghafla, in forgetfulness. You're back in the rush and you're in the busyness, and you switch, your state changes. And so we've got to have a mechanism that allows us to come into being self-regulating our state, right? And being aware that we have this state that's fluctuating in our heart. And so when we have this breath is this self-regulation tool to, okay, as soon as I feel like something is rising in me, whether it's annoyance or anger or whatever is kind of bubbling up from like, the engagement with dunya, is to have this place where we can bring in. It's not about disconnecting from the dunya. We have to be engaged in relationships and work, but it's about breathing in, literally, remembrance into our forgetfulness. And so the more that we can bring, not just tafakkur in the sense of being out in nature and being away from everything and being in peace and coming into this state of reflection, but actually inculcating states of muraqabah, meaning watchfulness of ourself in the moment that things arise throughout our day. So I would say that like taking breaks and going into nature, like for a retreat every once in a while, and then, we have to do this on cycles. So like maybe once a year we need to go out and spend a time in a retreat. Once a month, we should like take a day and like go on a hike or something, or go into nature. But then on once a week, we should be taking a couple hours. And then on once a day, we should like go on a walk, take a walk around the block, put your feet on grass, connect and breathe and reset. And what that will do is it will give you almost like training and more resource. It's like resourcing yourself so that when you're dealing with the harsh reality of the squeezing and the struggles of our lives, that we can take from that experience and bring it into just that little moment. That when I start to get sad or I start to get hopeless, I can not just say Allah up here as a dhikr, but actually bring that remembrance into my heart. Surely in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. And so the heart is here in the chest, the sadr, and it's also the same place that rises and falls when we breathe. So when we breathe, it's like this built-in mechanism to self-regulate and regulate our state and bring ourselves back into remembrance in like microdoses.
Thank you for that insightful response. We received a question on the chat from Malik. She says, "Thank you, Dr. Abdallah, for such an insightful talk. I just have a couple of questions. So the first one is, if younger generations are being shaped by constant digital stimulation and immediacy, what does that mean for our ability to access the kind of stillness and reflection needed for alignment with fiṭrah, and how can that be restored?"
Yeah, great question. What it means for our ability to access it's detrimental. The more that people don't have, not only don't have experiences of connecting with nature and natural life, or kind of like analog life rather than digital life, it will start to like atrophy. People will almost be averse to it, not know how to deal with it, not want to deal with it. And the way that the digital kind of world of information it's constantly feeding on the nafs tendency for wanting like immediate satisfaction and stimulation. And so it like actually does dumb down or take away our ability to be still. And because we're just so used to being, this is why so many people have ADHD and so many people have short attention spans, and we're constantly checking our phones and we feel like we're missing something. And so it definitely has a detrimental effect. But the more important thing is that, like your question is, how can it be restored? Is that to have hope and be positive that it always can be restored. Why? Because our nature is to be in stillness and reflection and experiencing sakina. And so we're always going to have this innate nature of that, but we're going to just get further and further from it. So the way that we do that, so for instance, even just today, earlier before I gave this talk, it's a Saturday. I have 3 kids. My youngest, I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. My youngest is 10, and he's also developmentally delayed and autistic. But he has this, like, because of his condition, he really gets stuck on screens. And so we constantly trying to limit it. And we know that when he's in playing outside and engaging with people and in nature, he like becomes a different person. Like it's like he's easier, he's more patient, but he forgets that he likes that. When he's there, he loves it. But then when he's in the digital world, he's like, no, I need this. I want to stay here. I don't want to go outside. And so what we do is we kind of balance it. So every amount of time that he's on a screen, we make sure that he has to be playing outside or doing some analog, non-digital engagement with real life. And so this is about balance. This is how we balance things, is that to say, let's completely negate or get rid of all engagement with digital stimulation is unrealistic. For many people, young people, they may not be able to sustain their livelihood if they're not like getting with AI and these things, but it has to be in balance. And there will never be a time when, no matter what our advancement is with AI and digital capacity, it will never replace the need for us to be still and connect with people and connect heart to heart and connect with nature. And so we just have to keep it in balance. We have to be really disciplined about it, I think, is how we restore it, you know. We have to take ourselves away.
Jazakallah khair for that thoughtful answer. The second question from Malik says, you also mentioned materialism and disconnection from nature as contributing to dis-ease. How do you see modern capitalist structures shaping these conditions within Islamic societies? And how is it possible to engage with those systems without compromising alignment with fiṭrah?
Yeah, this is really good question. And it's really tough because I think, you know, modern capitalist structures have infiltrated into Islamic societies. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, post-colonialism. There's this sense, a lot of Muslim societies have been told that their ways were backwards, and they've internalized that, you know. So even though you look at our grandparents' generation and they were connected to nature and they were maybe living in the country, and that's considered backwards, and that somehow got kind of used against the Muslim community of like, your deen is backwards, the religion is backwards, your old ways, your traditional ways are backward. And in order to be, you know, intelligent and forward thinking and civilized, you have to adopt modernity and academia and secularism and capitalism. And that's so it's a huge problem, almost more so in Islamic societies, or you say Muslim societies. They're not very Islamic in the way that, in that sense. And so the way that we can engage with those systems without compromising is we have to recognize that everything is from Allah. So part of capitalism happening is part of just the journey of humanity. We're not staying here. This isn't the end, right? And we have to understand that all this destruction and removal from what's right and what's natural is part of the process of what's happening in this dunya, and there will be an end to it. And that's part of the end, is that trajectory. So to kind of fight that and to say it shouldn't be happening is denying Allah's qadr. But so what we can do is recognize that it is what it is, that this is how it is, and everything's from Allah. And within it, we have to not get caught up and fall for it, that everything has to be measured by progress in material means, you know, that we have to reorient ourselves to first principles. And so what that means is we can be rooted and spiritually grounded and still be out there trying to make our way in the world and trying to, you know, we're going to have to engage in the capitalist system in order to provide for our livelihood. And so there's context, you know, even when we look at fiqh or Islamic law, it's always understood what the best path has to be taken into consideration in context. And so we can't take anything as an extreme. We have to, you know, Islam is the middle path. So we have to approach everything with wasat, with wasatiyah. And so that means we engage with it, we participate in it, but we don't submit to it, you know? The human being is fundamentally an abd. The reality is that we are Abdallah, but we can forget that and we can put our ubudiyah towards anything. We can put it towards capitalism, towards an ideology, towards a person. And so it's our job individually and collectively to make sure that our ubudiyah is in relationship to Allah. And then if that's solid, then we can engage in this world, in this worldly life, and not see it as the end all be all, and not get caught up in it and not fall for the veil of the dunya. And so it's about balance, and it's about if you're going to, again, it's like the same concept with my son and the screen. If you're going to be in the capitalist world and the rat race and, working for productivity, then you've got to balance that with like taking breaks daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, right? Eating, exercising, eating, being disciplined about keeping yourself rooted in a fiṭrah lifestyle and not submitting to the unfiṭrah secular ideology of capitalist modernity.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer, and thank you again to Malik for these really engaging questions. And just from your answer, all these tips are so important to, like you said, balance our condition in this world where there's just over commodification, over digitization, especially these days, over financialization of everything. Money's sort of seeped into every facet of life. Just on that note of qadr, it brings to mind part of this ancient Greek epic poem, puts it in a really nice way. For fate, the willing leads, and the unwilling drags along. I think that just kind of resonant with what you're saying. So the next question we received anonymously in the chat, it says, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Rothman. Thank you for such an insightful talk. I've never connected fiṭrah, my diet, and the remembrance of Allah, and for that I'm grateful I attended this talk. I have a question. As someone living in a fast-paced environment, how can we reconnect our daily eating habits with our fiṭrah to enhance dhikr and spiritual awareness? Are there simple sunnah-based principles or habits that make a noticeable difference in the heart's receptivity? Beautiful question.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful question. So important, and there's so much. There's so much in the sunnah that is there. So I'll just give you a brief kind of taste of it. The prophetic medicine tradition, there's so much in the hadith about even particular foods and their medicinal qualities, and like particular foods. There are a whole bunch of foods mentioned in the Quran that all have very impactful healing properties, and like dates and pomegranates and grapes and all these particular things that are mentioned. And the Prophet ﷺ, like, not only does he have, there's so much hikmah in like the date and the date seed and the sort of wisdom in it, but that the types of foods and how to eat them and when to eat them is a whole science. Okay, so that's one thing. Then the relationship to food. So we have the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ told us that we should always keep our stomach 1/3 air, 1/3 water, 1/3 food. What that means is that we're meant to constantly be regulating what we put in our stomach and never reaching satiation. We shouldn't be satiated. We shouldn't eat until we're full. Like that is a sunnah of how to eat. So, and then in addition to that, fasting, he fasted every week, he fasted monthly, he fasted yearly, like again, the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly cycles of things. Fasting was a big one. So not eating food purifies. And now there's all this physiological science that validates that. There's all this intermittent fasting is the big thing. The Prophet intermittent fasted all the time. Okay, so limiting your food intake. And then how you eat, like there's all of these sunnah about eating with your hands. Like, so eating with your hands, there's a direct connection between the food and your body, right? So we talked about the closer you are to the source, the more it is in health, right? So eating with your hands has a particular physiological and spiritual thing that connects you to being mindful and dhikr. It makes you also eat more consciously and slowly. Also, eating with people. It's not only about sahba and barakah and connecting people, but there's an actual like spiritual reality to there being more nourishment in the food, to the point where the nourishment isn't tied specifically to the qualities of the food at that point, that like even if there's a little bit of food, it will fill you more because there's more barakah in it, right? So the more hands in the food, the more barakah. And so what that does is it like also within the kind of sitting amongst people and eating, you're meant to take the food, the Prophet would take the thing that was closest to him, right? And so there's already a like, I'm not just going to dive in and feed my belly. I'm going to be conscious of the adab of like eating whatever is available and having this awareness that other people need to eat. And in that, by being aware that other people need to eat, you're both doing this disciplining the nafs, right? The greediness that we have this tendency of like appetite, but we're also limiting what we eat because we want to share. So we'll eat less. And then if you'll notice, like sometimes you eat and eat and eat, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm so full. Whereas if you eat less and you give it some time, you realize, oh, actually, I feel satiated and I didn't eat as much. All these habits of eating actually allow that to happen naturally. So subhanAllah, all these things have deep, deep hikmah in them.
Thank you for that answer. The next question in the chat comes from Noura. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Abdallah. I think I struggle with moderation personally. I tend to swing between extremes in my practice, very consistent at times, then completely dropping off. I also notice that I have a more melancholic temperament where I overthink and feel things quite deeply. How can I build a more sustainable, moderate rhythm? Barakallahu feekum. Thank you for that thoughtful question.
Great question. These are all really good questions, mashallah. I would say the way that I'll answer this question is applies to everybody, regardless of what your temperament is. The notion of us having temperaments, like so a certain constitutional disposition, right? We tend to react a particular way to foods, or we get a little bit more, we're more mellow and down most of the time rather than like spring energy and external. And that's our tendency of our body. And anytime when we recognize and learn about our temperament, it's so that we can know what we need to do to put it in balance. It's not to say, this is how I am, and therefore that's just how I am, and I need to cope with it or learn how to work around it. It's so that you know where you need to put yourself into balance. And so, and it's also to be merciful with yourself. If you know that your constitution just makes you a little bit more melancholic, then you can be merciful. Like, okay, yeah, that's how I am. But you don't stop with it and say, well, that's how I am, khalas. You say, that's how I am, so I can be merciful with myself and have that mercy fuel my discipline to put it into balance. So what that would then mean is that tendency to be extreme is not a problem, because it can be from your temperament, but it also is just part of being human. Like the nafs fluctuates constantly. We never sort of are in this natural state. In order to get to a level of balance and homeostasis, we need to discipline. We need to do a lot of work. And the only way we can do that is not by following a universal format, because we're all different. What we need to do is study ourselves and recognize when am I up, when am I down? What happened? What are the patterns that are making me react to my nafs fluctuation? And so this is a process of muraqabah, watching ourselves, studying ourselves, and muhasabah, taking account of ourselves, taking notes, tracking what did I eat today, how much exercise did I do, what was my mood, so if we have this log where we're tracking our habits and recognizing our mood, then and then also understanding, like for men, understanding how we are impacted by the sun on a daily cycle, and for women, understanding how the lunar cycle impacts us. We have actually a course in Dar al-Shifaa it's called Living Cyclically, and it's taught by my colleague Rehab Ramadan Arif, and it's all about the women's cycle, but for men and women to understand that we shouldn't expect all of us individually, nor amongst men and women, to just be able to function the same way. We have this like idea of like peak performance and productivity, and we just kind of blanketly say, okay, well, you're supposed to do this and every day and discipline. Like, no, you've got to understand your cycle according to all these different factors. And then the more that you have, the more knowledge that you have about yourself by studying you in particular, which, some of that can be informed by universal knowledge, but then it has to really be particular in studying yourself. Then you can know, where do I need to put myself into balance? What stimulates my overthinking? When I feel really deeply, if now I've tracked this 7 times over a month and I see, okay, I was overthinking more at this time of the month. Okay, maybe that has something to do with the monthly cycle. And then I realize I'm overthinking more in this particular scenario at work. Okay, now I got to keep track of that particular thing. Does it happen again? And then you notice that the second time, oh, it's the same thing lining up. And then you find out the third time, okay, well, that part wasn't there, so maybe it's something else. So the more data points you have, the more you can fine tune to this process of balance. And so the thing is we're always striving to and moving to put into balance, and at the same time being merciful and accepting where we are in the moment. It's never about trying to be somewhere else that we aren't, because we can only be in alignment with ourselves and with Allah and witnessing Allah in the moment. And so we always have to accept where we are right now and strive to come into balance, or strive to be more like the character of the Prophet ﷺ, knowing that we'll never get there, and knowing that the destination is not the point. It's the journey, the process.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Abdallah. And we're just at the time, but I did receive a question anonymously, so perhaps we can wrap up with that one. And if you can address it briefly, it's a 2-part question. I guess it's relevant to your work with Data Shifaa. This person says, what are some traditional institutions that can be revived to reintroduce these principles? And secondly, how can we bring this into contemporary education curriculums?
So is the question about institutions like actual institutions of learning, or institutions like more broadly like types of institutions?
What I get, it didn't say it explicitly, but I suppose that when they mean traditional institutions, like more broadly.
So one of the things is we have to move away from our engagement with education as just being the memorization of information. We have this like unfortunate move towards our we have all these like scholars that it's like this cult of personality, where the more eloquent somebody speaks and the more information they've memorized, we see that as like the ultimate goal, or the ultimate thing is like, okay, and then my path then is to like take more courses and memorize more information. But that's not Islamic education. That's education about Islam. Islamic education, in order for it to be Islamic, it has to be of surrender, of a process of submission. And that fundamentally needs to involve tarbiyah. It needs to involve suhbah. It needs to involve physical embodiment, not just intellectual engagement with information. And so this has always been how traditional learning, and so we need to bring that institution of learning back. Ta'lim and tarbiyah. There has to be a developmental process in somebody's learning. So like the ijaza system was never meant to be a checkbox of memorizing a book. Now that's kind of what it's being reduced to. But what it used to be is, yes, you study, and then the teacher assesses the person's state, their not just their hal, but their maqam. Like the station of, is the knowledge that they study actually impacting their heart and illuminating their heart? And then at that point, they would get an ijaza or be given permission because of their embodiment of the knowledge, not just their memorization of the knowledge. And so this is really important. This is something we try to do at Cambridge Muslim College, where I teach. I used to be the principal of the college. Now I lead just the program in Islamic psychology. And so all the programs there, we really try to embody this, where it's not just information, but transformation. And then also I teach and I train practitioners in my method of healing, which is called the Shifaa method. And so I have a whole training program where we're teaching practitioners not just about a method of protocol, but most of the teaching most of the process of training is them purifying their own heart. And so these are the types of ways that we need to bring back, where it's training is not information. It's really getting hearts to transform. So I just put a link for that practitioner training program that we have.
Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Abdallah. I also shared some relevant links in the chat. So alhamdulillah, thank you all for your thoughtful engagement and questions. And special thanks again to Dr. Abdallah Rothman for sharing his time, his scholarship and insight with us. Conversations like this remind us that returning to balance begins with returning to awareness of our souls, our patterns, and our place within creation. So to stay connected with Dr. Rothman's work, you can find the links. And if you'd like to stay updated on upcoming Shajarat an-Nur programs, please follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, where the session will be uploaded, inshallah. And you can join our WhatsApp group for updates and announcements. And we look forward to gathering again soon, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد السابق للخلق نوره ورحمة للعالمين ظهوره عدد من مضى من خلقك ومن بقي ومن سعد منهم ومن شقي صلاة تستغرق العد وتحيط بالحد صلاة لا غاية لها ولا منتهى ولا انقضاء صلاة دائمة بدوامك وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما مثل ذلك.